Hi guys, happy snow day. I'm gonna try and get through these notes pretty quickly, but you know me, I tend to talk a lot, so I'll try and get through them. So we're gonna start with why boundaries cause problems. So governing states. National governments can be classified as democratic, autocratic, or anocratic. That's a new one, right? Democracy is a country which citizens elect leaders and can run for office. An autocracy is a country that can run according to the interests of the ruler rather than the people. And an anocracy is a country that is not fully democratic or fully autocratic, but rather a mix of the two. So if we look at our map here, we've got autocracies in purple. We've got anocratic countries in yellow, so our mixtures there. We've got our somewhat democratic countries in lime, our fully democratic countries in pistachio, our failed, I guess, democracies in, let me call it a color, maybe like a peachy, it's not really peach, pink. And then we have the countries we have no data on in white. So what I find fascinating about this is that a lot of times, not a lot, I don't know, it seems like in the news, it seems like in the media, people seem to think that the United States is the only democracy out there. But take a look. Look at all those pistachio countries. Look at all those countries that are lime. Look at all those countries that are a mixture. Lots of democracies out there. Lots of countries that have rights where the citizens are electing the leaders, where citizens are making all kinds of decisions, where people have freedom. So that's just something interesting to think about. Okay, so national scale and regime types. Let's see, hold on. It looks like on our notes that we have national scale regime types. Oh, okay. Democracies and autocracies differ in three essential elements. First of all, in the selection of leaders. So democracies have institutions and procedures through which citizens can express effective preferences about alternative policies and leaders. Autocracies, on the other hand, have leaders who are selected according to clearly defined and usually hereditary rules of succession from within the political elite. So that's a big difference. Okay, the next difference is about citizen participation. In a democracy, there are institutionalized constraints on the exercise of power by the executive, so by the person who is at the top of the democracy. Whereas in autocracy, citizens' participation is restricted or suppressed. So in a democracy, the executive has constraints on their power, and in autocracy, the citizens have restraints on their power. And the third balance is checks and balances, the third difference is in the area of checks and balances. Democracies guarantee civil liberties to all citizens, and autocracies have leaders who exercise power with no meaningful checks from legislative, judicial, or civil society institutions. So in general, the world has become more democratic since the turn of the 19th century. So this shows us the number of countries whose population is greater than 500,000, who are, the red line shows autocracies, the yellow line shows anocracies, and the blue line shows us democracies. So we see how the democracies have risen, so all the way up there, almost close to 100, but not quite. And look at those autocracies. It's an interesting little data spike there. Okay, so let's look at electoral geography. Boundaries separating legislative districts within the U.S. and other countries are redrawn periodically to ensure each has about the same population. There are 435 districts in the U.S. House of Representatives, and they're redrawn every 10 years following the Census Bureau's release of the official population figures. The process of redrawing legislative boundaries for the purpose of benefits the party in power is called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering takes three forms. The first is the wasted vote spreads opposition supporters across many districts but in the minority. The second is that excess vote concentrates opposition supported into a few districts. And the third is that stacked vote links distinct areas of like-minded voters through oddly shaped boundaries. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled gerrymandering illegal in 1985, but here's the interesting tidbit. It didn't require dismantling of the existing oddly shaped districts. So even though you can't gerrymander in the future, like you can't create a new gerrymandered district, if a district was already in place, it's allowed to stay in place, which is why we have all these funny districts already. Okay, so here's an example of a district that's been gerrymandered. Look at District 1 there, how they've taken a chunk out of that top there of Districts 2, 4, and 5. Okay. So these are all the different ways that districts could be gerrymandered in order to get advantages in their representative districts. There's a really cool game called the it has a name, the redistricting game. And should we have more snow days this week, perhaps we will play that. It's actually really fun. I mean, everything is really fun in our class, clearly, but it's actually really fun, and you get to play around with, like, who you can benefit in an election based on how you gerrymander things, which you guys already played, like you did it on paper, but it's fun to do it on the computer, too. Okay, so let's talk about why states cooperate and compete with each other. A great example of that is the Cold War competition and alliances. So we have the division of the world into military alliances. And this resulted after World War II from the emergence of two superpowers, the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So out of that, there were the military cooperation in Europe. And so we have two major groups. The first is NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And this was made up of the 16 democratic states, including the U.S., Canada, and 14 other European states. And of course, most of these are going to be Western Europe. And then we have the Warsaw Pact. This was a military agreement among communist Eastern European countries that agreed to defend each other in case of attack. If you're in the same place as me, you need to turn the page. Ba-doop. So, NATO and the Warsaw Pact were designed to maintain a bipolar balance of power in Europe. And NATO's objective was to prevent the spread of communism by the Soviet Union. So, what was happening was that the Soviet Union, had maintained the areas that they were in during World War II, and they were trying to kind of create a buffer zone out of the Eastern Bloc countries. And so they were refusing to remove influence from those countries. And NATO was trying to essentially try to contain communism in those regions. So the Warsaw Pact objective was to provide the Soviet Union, I should have read ahead, a buffer of allied states between it and Germany to discourage a third German invasion of the Soviet Union in the 20th century. So the Warsaw Pact disbanded once Europe was no longer dominated by military confrontation between the two blocs. Okay, some other economic alliances in Europe. So we have the EU. This was formed in 1958. The members are Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. And the purpose was to heal Western Europe's scars from World War II. And we've talked about whether or not Turkey should be allowed into the EU. And we talked about things that are kind of required of members of the EU and elements that exist in Turkey and whether or not Turkey meets the requirements of the EU. The next thing we have is the Comic-Con, not the thing that you go to, when you're into comic books, no judgments. So this is the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. This was formed in 1949. The members are the 7 Eastern European communist states from the Warsaw Pact plus Cuba, Mongolia, and Vietnam. I bet they have some amazing parties, probably some really good food served there. Their purpose was to promote trade and the sharing of natural resources. So if we look at these organizations, the green is NATO and the European Community. The pistachio is NATO only. The yellow is the European Community only. The gray is the Warsaw Pact and Comic-Con. And not original members, the blue stars joined NATO from 1952 to 1982. The red stars joined the European Community from 1973 to 1986. And, hold on. Okay, I thought I was crazy for a minute. The red stars joined the European Community from 1973 to 1986. And the black stars left the Comic-Con from 1963 and left the Warsaw Pact in 1986. So the first map tells you 1980, the second map tells you 2013. So you can definitely tell from in the midst of the Cold War to after the Cold War how the unification of Europe has kind of changed things. Okay, economic alliances in Europe. Let me see where we are. Okay, so the EU in the 21st century has expanded to 12 countries during the 1980s, expanded to 27 in the 2000s. The main task of the EU is to promote development within member states through economic and political cooperation. So the Eurozone has been the most dramatic step toward integrating Europe's nation states into a regional organization. The European Central Bank has been given responsibility of setting interest rates and minimizing inflation through the Eurozone. And they have a common currency which has been established, and that is the euro. So we've got the airport now, we have EU passports. There's a euro. Very cool. If any of you guys have any euros from your trips, because I know some of you are world travelers, if you would bring those in to let people see, that would be awesome. So we talked about cooperating. We've got some competition as well. Terrorism by individuals and organizations. Terrorism. Look here. Hold on. The shy one. That's Blake. Hey, Blake. Hey, Blake. I'm ignoring you, Mother. Okay, sorry. I'll probably never get the... Oh, I got it. I was afraid I was going to get it balanced again. Terrorism is the systematic use of violence by a group in order to intimidate a population or coerce a government into granting its demands. Okay, so when you read that definition, think about... acts that go on and how you would, how that definition should be used, how the media misuses that definition, how the media labels people or doesn't label people with the term terrorist. So there are distinctive characteristics of terrorists. Those trying to achieve their objectives through organized acts of terror, for example, bombing, kidnapping, hijacking, taking of hostages, and assassination. Viewing violence as a means of bringing widespread publicity to their cause. Believing in a cause so strongly they attack despite knowing they will probably die in the act. And this differs from other acts of political violence because the attacks are aimed at ordinary people rather than military or political leaders. Okay, and so you probably all, if you don't remember, You probably all have seen pictures of 9/11 in the World Trade Center. So there is state support for terrorism in places. Several Middle Eastern states have supported terrorism in recent years at 3 increasing levels of involvement. Some provide sanctuary for terrorists wanted by other countries. So Afghanistan and probably Pakistan have provided sanctuary for al-Qaeda terrorists by essentially allowing them to come and be protected there in those countries. Some states supply weapons, money, and intelligence to terrorists. And some states actually plan attacks using terrorists. In that realm of supplying terrorists, Iraq and Iran have been accused of providing material and financial support for terrorists. However, the extent of involvement is controversial. For example, with Iraq, the U.S. asserted that Saddam Hussein had close links with al-Qaeda, and in Iran, the U.S. had accused Iran of harboring al-Qaeda members, of trying to gain influence in Iraq. And the U.S. and other countries feared Iran's development of nuclear weapons, program was intended to develop weapons. Feared Iran's development of a nuclear program was intended to develop weapons. And those are ongoing concerns. We could add, at this point, we could definitely add North Korea to that list, and a lot of other countries as well. Since certainly Syria is now in that mix. Iraq is in that list for other reasons involving ISIL, and Iran is in that list for continued reasons. So there are lots of other issues involving terrorism. So in summary, the Earth's land area is divided into nearly 200 states. It is impossible to find a perfect match between the boundaries of a state and the area inhabited by a single ethnicity. States are separated by boundaries which are either physical or cultural, and competition among states has been replaced in some regions by economic alliances, especially in Europe. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow.